So welcome everyone to this session. I hope you've had a wonderful morning. We were in a very delightful session just before this with first generation students and supporting them back to campus in fall. And so this session kind of leads into that. In fact, most of our sessions in this conference deal with, inclusion, diversity, equity, and really thinking along the spaces of who of our students are not being served and how can we improve some of our systems and processes. And to continue that conversation today, we have this wonderful panel. And we are going to take a minute to just introduce this amazing panel. I know some of them personally and I've worked with them, so I'm really excited to have them all here. Again, I'm going to start with Dr. Fariel Pearson, no stranger to Omaha. Dr. Pearson, aka Mama Beast, is a mother, activist, author, educator, speaker, poet, comedian, cook, and citizen of the world. Can we tag in more, Fariel? She's an assistant professor of teacher education and has been teaching humans of all ages for 20 years in the Omaha area. As a Kenyan, Indian, Muslim immigrant, queer, disabled woman of color, she is passionate about working towards diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and most importantly, kindness. Thank you, Fariel, for being with us today. Next up, we have Dr. Sandra Rodriguez Arroyo. And Dr. Sandra is an associate professor of ESL, bilingual teacher of education, and a faculty member with the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Her research and teaching interests include preparing teachers to work with the growing rate of English learners in Nebraska. Again, trans-languaging perspectives in bilingual education, teacher preparation, asset-based service learning. We heard about that in our first keynote speaker, Dr. Rendon, yesterday, and we've been hearing about this even in the last session. So we're excited to have you here with us, Dr. Arroyo. And last but not least, we have Echo Hawk Left Hand with us. And Echo Hawk Left Hand has been the director for the Native Indigenous Centered Education Program for Omaha Public Schools for the last 4 years. He's an experienced public health and Indian education supervisor with a demonstrated history of working in healthcare and K-12 education organizations. And welcome, a warm welcome to you. And I'm really excited to get this panel started. We're just going to dive right in and sort of get to some kind of discussion here. And, a lot of questions on our mind as we return to campus, but primarily what this pandemic has shown us is the gaps, right, in equity. And I'd like to really start by framing this discussion. What does it mean to be equity-minded? And Fariel, I think I will start with you and then we'll sort of pass it around.
Sure. So to me, equity is about systemic justice, right? So it's not about fixing the students, what's wrong with them, or if they're not able to be successful in the systems that we have. It's more about looking at the systems and changing those systems so that they're more accessible to our students. And so instead of blaming them for low test scores or failing classes or not showing up enough times, we really need to look deeper and ask what are the barriers that are creating these issues, stopping them from being successful and from thriving and being happy where they are.
Right. And Sandra, I would like you to just sort of add on there, because I know you work with a lot of, students who in the last session, we were told not to assume anything and really to be able to, back it with facts. And I know you are a big proponent of this. So keeping that in mind, how do we think about equity and how can we be equity minded as educators? Is she frozen?
Yes.
It looks like it. Oh, she's back.
Okay.
So you were, I don't know if it was on my side, but I think what I understood was like when equity from my perspective and from my work and what I have seen, Not making assumptions. There's a lot of different things, especially when it comes to English learners at all grades and levels. And I think that one of the first things that I teach my future teachers is that all English learners are different. All English learners have different languages, different backgrounds, and we need to learn that first. We cannot assume that all English learners are Latinos, and that they are all Spanish speakers. So we need to make sure equity is at the bigger system. It's also at the smaller systems too, and getting to know people and those relationships that we develop, and learning about their backgrounds is extremely important before we I call that in Spanish the pobrecito perspective, the poor people perspective. So we feel sorry for them. We want to make sure that they're taken care of, but when then we take away their access because we think that they cannot do anything. So we when we take away that, we take away a lot of their access, a lot of their opportunities, because we think of them from a deficit perspective. So we need to start for what they know, what are they able to do, and then be able to add to that. So it's an additive perspective. Thinking about equity from that pobrecito perspective is not a good thing. So that's the aspect that I emphasize a lot because it's not helpful.
And Echo Hawk, I think that you have some perspective to bring to this discussion as well. When we're thinking about creating a framework of equity, especially now when we've realized so many of our gaps in our systems, what can you say in how can we go about to create this framework and make sure that some of our students who feel invisible are better served? I think you're muted. Okay.
Yeah, I think, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I'm kind of I'm in the Southwest, so my connection is a little sketchy. So I apologize. So hopefully everybody can hear me. But from the Native American community or any community of color or underrepresented community, I think community participatory approaches are generally the best way to include all peoples in any type of systemic change through community participatory approaches. You ask the community, what do you feel your needs and things of that nature are, and then you connect that to some of those health outcomes or social determinants, and then try to align them in the best way. For the Native American community, I know that Pharrell was talking about some of these systemic policies that have been enacted, and some of those systemic policies have been enacted to try to better equity too, but also maybe hinder, like segregation. Segregation, it keeps people from saying that this is this school and that school for certain populations. And some of that within my position in OPS has kind of hindered because we've tried to create pathways for Native Americans in the high schools, but because of segregation policies and things of that nature, we're not able to say, like North is a Native American high school or something like that. So not saying that Native peoples are going to go to school there, but just saying that our program can focus resources at that school, and that Native peoples who are interested should be able to go to that school. But for some of these policies, sometimes that can be a barrier.
Mm-hmm. And Ferial, how can we know who our students are and will be coming in fall? Because there's a lot of change that has happened and taken place as a result of the pandemic. So how can we begin to know who our students are that are going to come back to us in fall?
I think there are multiple things we can do before they join us. Something that I do is I send out a kind of a survey or a questionnaire asking the students, who are you? What is it I need to know about you? What are your responsibilities outside school? Will there be any barriers to you accessing things with technology? How familiar are you with our dashboard? We use Canvas at UNO. So how familiar are you with the dashboard? Is there anything that people or professors have done in the past that have made class difficult for you that I should know about? And what is it that where are your strengths? right? So what is it that you bring to us in terms of resources, in terms of expertise, in terms of language? How many languages do you speak? All of that kind of stuff, so that I know what they're bringing in terms of cultural capital, or what we call funds of knowledge, right? That we can use to make class richer and more wonderful, and a more accessible place to them, more engaging place. But then also, what are the barriers that they face, so that I can work to help mitigate those. And so they'll say things like, I don't have internet access, or my internet is sketchy, or I have 2 small children at home, and sometimes I have to go and get them, or my babysitter will cancel. Or they'll say, I have these accommodations that need to happen. And even though we get emails from our accessibility office that says, hey, this person needs accommodations, sometimes they're not super specific, or I need a little bit more detail and a little more help to understand, well, what does that look like for one particular student? Because it's different for every single student. Just like Dr. Rodriguez Arroyo said earlier, having more time for one student looks different than having more time for another student. What time does that mean, and where is that coming from? So that's the first thing, before they even come in, to have a survey or a questionnaire. The second thing, which I think is one of the most important pieces of being culturally competent or teaching with a culturally responsive lens, is to build really strong relationships with those students. And so consistently, every class period that we have, we do icebreakers right at the beginning. And I'll ask questions, not super deep personal questions, but just, 2 roses and a thorn. What are 2 things that are going well in your life right now? And what is one thing you're worried about? And we'll do that not only in the big group, but also in the small group, so that they're building relationships with one another, as well as building relationships with me, so that they have that many more resources for help and networking and all of that kind of stuff. So building relationships is really, really crucial. And then when I think about language, because you and me and Sandra are all, and I think Echo Hawk as well, we're multilingual, right? But making sure that I'm bringing different languages into the classroom to honor those pieces of their identity. And so I'll play music as they come into class in different languages. I'll find out what their favorite songs are, which is on the questionnaire, and I'll play those songs. And then, greeting them in their own language, if I can learn how to do that, or even say thank you. So making sure language is included. And then also, having them talk about their families and what their lives are like is really important. So those relationships are key to truly understanding who our students are.
I think you brought up several great points there, Ferial. And, I'd love to be in your class. You know that I've said that many times. But other than that, most of the attendees here are advisors and people who work in advising as well. We do have faculty attending too. But one of the questions I keep getting asked is, and maybe Sandra, you can also add on here, is how can we create those spaces in our office, in our little cubicle, in our space, when we have 45 minutes and boom, 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 this is your schedule. Do you know your resources? How do we create that cultural capital that you're talking about? It seems so elusive sometimes. So Sandra, can you kind of go through some of the ways in which we can create visibility in our office spaces?
And I think I do academic advising too for my graduate students, and it tends to be, I remember when I first started, I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I was starting, I needed to get familiarized myself with the language of academic advising and the systems. I think that once we're familiar with that, we will feel a lot more comfortable. But the first thing is making sure they're welcome. One of my biggest thing when it comes to advising is I know that time is limited, but that first meeting, we're so worried about systems and everything else. But I think it's extremely important that first meeting have like the first part, do not be afraid of asking questions. Do not be afraid of asking the students, are you afraid? Things like that. Or what are your biggest concerns? What are your biggest, what do you think are going to be, what are you strong with? What are your, what are your things that you need to work in? Not your bad things, but areas to work in that we can help you outreach and find support. when we get our students, and I think that those first and second year type of students too, they like, I got a text message this morning from a student, it's like, how do I get registered? And I'm like, you don't know that? That's basic. So we get frustrated, and my first initial thing was like, go online, look it up. So, so that's the type of thing. But this is a student that is not familiar with the systems. It's a student that didn't go to college in the US. So those type of things we need to, like, what do you know, what you think are your biggest challenges? Just asking basic questions at the beginning, that we think that they know it all in terms of that everything is easy because we are using our own lenses. We need to take out our lenses and the script. As advisors, we have the script. I know, because we have a list of things that we need to go through. But it's extremely important that we let go of the script a little bit here, especially those initial meetings, and that we do check-ins.
Mhm.
Because especially our first and second year students could get lost in the process. And we may be like, oh, I need to tell them again this, again and again and again. I've been there, and I remember, I know what it is to give the instructions 100 times, and they're like still asking the same questions. And you're like, okay. But provide that support that you can still, it's a scaffold type of support in which you're like, okay, now you need to be a big mama here. I need to be a big mama and kick their butts a little bit. Pardon my language here. But sometimes I need to tell them, okay, what's going on here? I have told you this a couple times. Now I want to see some initiative from your part. So I walk them through the process by asking them, what do you need to do here? So instead of
Mhm.
telling them what to do step by step, I tell them, okay, show me. Where do you think that you need to start here?
Mhm.
Because we want to be big mamas in terms of caring too, and so, because we are Latinas. I'm a Latina. I want to do everything for them, But I'm like, I think they need to, like, do it yourself and show me how you do it. So it's
Right.
about developing that independence too, and in the advising process, that we need to let them go a little bit in the process. Show me, let's see how you do it. And then so it's a guiding process. It's a guiding process. Ask those questions. Don't be, I feel like as many advisors have that script, and then they don't ask the students, would you like something else?
Mhm. Right.
Find what their interest is and their best matches are. As advisors, we also need to find that out. So I went a little bit too much, but let me know if you need more advising tips, because sometimes I get like, okay, don't go with your first stop is my biggest advice. Don't go with your first stop of going with the script.
Right. The checklists. We have to meet students where, yes, and we're very used to having like all the processes and making sure we hit the processes. But sometimes also the relationship is what I'm hearing is very important. And I know I just got a comment, validating student goals and helping the students identify a support system. So being able to empower them is going to be important. Echo Hawk, I wanted to ask in regards to that, and I know we talked a lot. Barry also mentioned a little bit about those language models. How can we have these frank or hard dialogues about the climate for underserved students with a goal of affecting a paradigm shift in language and action? So how can we begin to start having these dialogues, because we want to create a framework where everybody has equal access and everybody is being successful. But how can we begin to have these frank, hard dialogues about this?
Frank Hart, I didn't catch the last part of what you said. The Frank Hart dialogues about.
About how can we change the climate for underserved students with the goal of affecting a sort of paradigm shift in our language and in our actions?
Oh, in our language, I think it's just being respectful. I think for myself, from the Native American community, there's also an understanding that not all native peoples are one peoples. There's over 570 some odd different tribes. And so some of the language, you know, is appropriately defining, you know, certain ethnic groups. You know, the term Indian is something that is cringeworthy in some communities. You know, some people prefer indigenous or Native American, but particularly, I think within the Native community anyway, it's just there's specific tribes. You know, whether you're Lakota, Dakota. For myself down here in the Southwest, I'm Dene or Navajo, Hopis, Pueblos. You know, getting to know your population, I think, is the best way in changing some of our language, and not trying to paint broad strokes, I guess, on certain groups of people. You know, even our Asian community, you know, there's different, you know, representations from them too, and not to assume. You know, I think it's always better to ask than just to make assumptions. And so that's kind of one thing to change the language. And then also, I guess, being helpful. I do hear what was said earlier about, you know, creating accountability. I think even particularly for Native peoples, that's something that has to be done. And so in that language too, you know, there's kind of a delicate line somewhere that you have to figure out. When can you push, and then when do you kind of back off and let them take the initiative to do something? I think that's something. When I was helping in a study, you know, a lot of our Native American community was older and returning back to school because they had children, they had different things going on. And so a lot of times they prefer going to our tribal colleges because there's more understanding of some of those things that happen, you know, in life, and having to pay bills, and sometimes not having a vehicle to make it to work, transportation issues, food issues. You know, there's a whole gamut of things that can happen to a person that, you know, although they're trying to go to school, you know, there's competing priorities. And so sometimes understanding that, you know, students of underrepresented minorities sometimes have other competing priorities because of inequities as well. And that's not to say that, you know, to give them a break more than anybody else, but, you know, just to be understanding, I guess, is what I'm saying. So that type of language and understanding, you know, I think within education, you know, we're all about trying to help each other and trying to promote knowledge and growth. And so having that perspective and having that point of conversation, you know, and saying that, hey, I just want to have the best, and I'm here to help you the best way that I can. I think within any community, that's the best approach to take, and then, you know, go from there.
Right. I like that. Again, echoing a lot of that kindness and understanding. There's a question in the chat that I want to give to Ferio, but Echo, I did have a follow-up question. You know, we work a lot with, well, our college is beginning to look at, you know, the gaps in our systems and think about students who are being left out and what we can do to better it. And we did, I was curious to know how is, you know, we struggle to pull data for Native American students. And do you have any suggestions in these areas as to how we should frame that? Because a lot of it depends on what does the data say, and how can we have data that is reliant enough to make tangible change?
I think sometimes when you're collecting information like that on surveys, and especially with Native American communities, we're so multi-ethnic. We're not just Native American, you know, there's also Caucasian, there's also African American, you know, Hispanic communities. And sometimes, you know, especially our demographic, whatever household that you're raised in, like if you're raised in an African American predominant home, you tend to just, you know, mark that box, I guess you could say. But we find that the more that you open it, you know, to say like select all that apply, you know, and then they can choose, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm also Native American, I'm also, you know, Hispanic, and different things of that nature. And then that way you can kind of get a better picture of, you know, who's at attending different services or programs or schools or things like that. So, and then also if you want to put the Native American, tab, you can also put like a little underneath bracket and say which tribe, are you, Umaha, Ponca, or you don't even have to put it that, just say what tribe, if known, because many of our relatives, they are unsure of what tribe that they come from. And so just being able just to put that option for those that really want to put that too. So I think that would be valuable for other communities as well, not just the Native American.
Mm-hmm. And fair, that's really important, Echo Hawk. And I think that's just understanding how we approach our surveys, what kind of information we're trying to gather. I think that's going to be important to make some of those distinctions. It would help quite a lot. And Ferial, Corey has a really interesting question in the chat. He kind of says that, how do you see, in terms of Nebraska, how do you see the future beliefs of the state moving when it seems as though topics such as CRT are being attacked by both current and more likely future politicians to lead the state? So, when we're thinking about inclusion or even a visibility framework, when the state itself seems to be at very contentious about these issues, how can we within our college systems provide support? I think is what there's a lot to be unpacked in that question, but if you could touch upon some of that.
Sure, I love this question, and because I'm thinking about it not only in terms of being a university employee, but also being a student myself. And when I was in advising situations, even as a doctoral student as recently as 2016, 2017, it was very painful to me when I was in advising meetings with professors or with advisors who treated me as though I was the same as everybody else and as though larger policies were not affecting me, right? And so I think, for example, in terms of the Muslim ban that happened in 2016, 2017, as a Muslim student, not one person asked me, how is this affecting you? And how is this affecting your student, your family, and how is this affecting your studies? And so I think it's crucial for advisors to understand what the political issues are that are happening around your students. If you know your students are, let's say a student is a refugee from Burma, do you know what's happening in Burma? Do you know if you have a family in Burma? Are you asking them about it? So I think it's really important to understand what the policies are that are affecting our students, not just locally, but federally as well, so that you can touch on that with the students and see if there's any support that they need around that. But I think when it comes to CRT, when it comes to which issues are being hidden, I believe strongly in the power of story, and I believe strongly in the power of voice. And so we really need to take a deep look at where are decisions being made and are our students' voices represented there by our students. We need to try not to speak for our students as much as possible. Of course, if there is no other recourse, we can speak for our students with their permission, and making sure that the stories that we are telling are accurate, checking with them first, right? Remember, checking in research, but asking them first, hey, would you like me to tell this in this meeting or in this, to testify on your behalf if you're not able to be there, but to truly give students spaces where they are able to tell their stories, so that folks can truly understand from multiple perspectives what is happening. You don't want to put a student on the spot and say, I would like you now to represent the entire culture or demographic that you belong to. But each individual story is still incredibly important, because there's what we call a danger of absence, where when we only have one story, or when we only have two stories, then stereotypes happen, then people don't understand the scope of what the issue is. We had a student, Dr. Rodriguez Arroyo and I, phenomenal student. She's in our teacher education diversity organization. And we invited her to our department meeting to come and speak about the issues that she and other students came as well. But one thing that, came to light in that meeting was, she said, none of the adults except our professors of color ever talk about issues to do with race or immigration, right? And these are things that really affect her and her classmates. And so that was very eye-opening for some of our faculty to say, we never realized that was something you could do. So I just want to end with one little piece of advice. It's not little, but an important piece of advice, which is that if you're not intentionally including, then you're unintentionally excluding. You have to truly be intentional and thoughtful about which voices are missing, which voices do you need to include, how can you include that in a respectful way that's not putting somebody on the spot, and making sure that you are bringing a variety of stories in so that we're not perpetuating stereotypes or making a community out to be this one thing with this one issue, because as Echo Hawk talked about, every community is incredibly diverse and has varied stories in it. And then we also need to think very intersectionally about things. So if we're going to be thinking about, like for me, it wasn't just about me being a Muslim student, it was also about me being a mom. One of my favorite advisors had back when I was getting my master's degree, she had a basket of toys and children's books in her little cubicle, so that if I needed to bring my children with me because I couldn't find childcare, I could bring my kids and they would be occupied. That meant more to me than anything else that she had ever done for me. So truly thinking about people as more than just the student ID number and the person who needs to take these classes, but what are those larger issues? And she would ask me constantly, what is it that systemically is holding you back that I can go and advocate for on your behalf? Or would you like to write a letter, or, would you like to come to this meeting and talk about that?
So many good points there, Ferial. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Arroyo, I wanted to ask you, because I know just hearing Ferial speak, it made me think about a couple of things. One is stereotyping, right? And the second is we, get to know your students, right? And so immediately we think, let's survey them, let's send out a survey, let's get to know. And then invariably what happens is, because we've not created a culture of trust, we have a lot of students who won't fill in the survey, or we'll have students who don't come in. And so then we're still at a loss. Or we have focus groups, but we don't get people coming to the focus groups. Or we'll have focus groups with people that we actually know, and then we'll herd them into the focus groups. So we still don't get a clear representation of what the problems are. So Dr. Arroyo, how can we mitigate this? How can we get authentic? How can we make authentic spaces where they come and then share?
One of the things I just finished, but I'm going to continue this project with parents from the learning community of South Omaha. And we had done a service learning project with them, and it took us a lot of different tries to figure out what it was. But first, it was going to their spaces, providing a space that they're comfortable with coming. It takes a while. It takes an insider from that person. So if there's a student that is a leader that can be the connector, that person that can be trusted, it cannot start with us many times. Me, even as a Latina, talking in Spanish, I'm still in a different world. They don't know me, but they knew a person in the community, and that person connected. Mm-hmm. So those connectors, because it could be more than one, are essential to identify. Many times they trust that peer student more than they trust us. So, but we need to be able to provide that peer student with supports too, either money wise or other ways of compensating them in some way, shape, or form. So that is one thing. But the other part of it too is, I love what Ferial said about the stories. I do this little thing that I do the survey to before, but many times I ask them for a picture. Bring a picture with you that represents who you are. So, and they tell me a story about that. Or I do this thing called connecting stories, in which we do like a circle thing in which we connect. I will tell them I love chocolate, and I went to Peru and study abroad, and I discovered there's a museum of chocolate, and somebody will connect that story with something else, and we end up talking about pets and people and places that they love. The last time I did that, we ended up talking about the beach and the animals and so those type of things need to start first. So we need to create that community by asking them to what they need, and survey informally. what it is that they need, and then we can say, okay, so this may work. And I had some great conversations. I had great responses from the parents because I knew them from that project before, and we provided food and spaces for them. We went to the community with them. So it's a togetherness type of space, but we had those connectors in those
Mhm.
communities that called them. They called them, not emailed them, not texted them. They called them.
Right. And Sandra, are these spaces visible on your campus? Like where, that's
Yeah.
going to be key, isn't it?
We brought them over to the community engagement center. That, of course, one of our challenges of university campuses is parking. So we provided transportation. So instead of them having to worry about driving or anything like that, we picked them up at the learning community of South Omaha. We brought them all the way into the even though the community engagement center has free parking, we discovered that it was easier for them to, instead of trying to figure out where to park in campus, it was easier to have a bus with accessibility too, because we had some accessibility issues. So we wanted to make sure that there were ramps in those buses, that they were prepared for babies, because we brought babies and little ones too, so that we didn't exclude anybody. Because when it comes
Mhm.
to, we may just want to do focus groups, and the parent and the our students are parents, and when we tell them their kids are not allowed, so then provide daycare services, provide somebody. So we provided that. Taking away those barriers is important. So say, like providing that food, if it's you're doing it at 5 o'clock or 12 o'clock, you need to provide food. So providing food, transportation, spaces. In which they came in, and one thing that we discovered was it was not our food; it was their food. So the sandwiches were not a big hit. They would go home and cook again, because it was the sandwiches were horrible for them. So we brought pupusas in. So those type of, how to work around even that, like asking, if are they Muslim students, do they have restrictions, so you cannot just assume that they're going to eat what we eat, in that way. If it was for me, I will eat Puerto Rican food all the time, but there's no Puerto Rican food in Omaha. So I either cook it myself or eat American food or something else. But when we do want to invite people, we want to ask them in terms of what it is that you eat. And we ask the parents. So it took us it's different tries. And also, don't give up. Because I feel like many times we try even 10 times and it doesn't work. And all of a sudden, you have that one moment of magic that will open the doors for others. So don't give up. And we have different groups of students that many times they graduate, and those were the leaders, and all the time we're like, oh, they're graduating. What are we gonna do now? So it's just keep inviting, and do it in different ways and different times, and also giving access and taking away barriers is important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ferial, there was a question that came in, and I was thinking you'd be perfect to answer this one. So one of the questions said that yesterday the advisor was very appreciative of Dr. Rendon mentioning the struggles that LGBTQ students and staff face. At our institution, we feel quite invisible. What advice do you have for our administrators to help us feel like we belong here?
I love that question because I'm very passionate about the LGBTQ community as a queer woman myself, but I also have a child who's trans. I have nibblings, which is the gender neutral term for nieces and nephews, who are trans or non-binary. By the way, yesterday was National Non-Binary Day, so happy National Non-Binary Day. I think there are many different ways to do this. I think just like putting something on your website, or when you email somebody and say Happy National Non-Binary Day. But I think my students have mentioned when they come to visit me in my office that I have just stickers and postcards up about various different issues. So I have a Black Lives Matter one. I have a Dreamers Monarch Butterfly. I have a Water is Life. I have the Safe Space Rainbow sticker. I have the non-binary flag, all of it, and the trans flag, all of those kinds of things. Just immediately, just having those things visible on your social media, having your pronouns on your, like I have my pronoun on my name right now in this meeting. I always introduce myself with my pronouns, regardless of whether I have any LGBT students in my classroom. I always say, hi, my name is Dr. Pearson. My pronouns are she, hers. And then giving students the opportunity to share theirs if they want to, but not forcing them to. Making sure that we're not tiptoeing around issues that are affecting our students. So again, knowing the laws and the policies and having built a relationship with the student, you can say, hey, you shared with me that this is a part of your identity. How are you feeling about this particular thing that's happening in legislatures or whatever, the legislature? I can speak English. So being very open about those conversations, and that goes for all communities, right? We can't be neutral on a moving train. You got to either be on the train or off the train. There's no way to be in the middle. And that becomes a very touchy subject when it comes to employees of a college or a university, is we think we're supposed to be neutral. We think we're not supposed to be quote unquote political. And that is, mind my language, BS. Education is political and always has been political. Politicians decide for us what it is that we do. And we can't be neutral, because by being neutral, we are complicit with the oppression that our students are facing daily in their everyday lives. And so we have to take moral stands. When it comes to your rights as college employees, you can be political, but you cannot be partisan. So you can't tell students, oh, you have to vote for this person or you have to be a Republican, but you can talk about issues. You can say, hey, how is this particular issue? If you have a student who's a dreamer, or you have a student who is an athlete and wants to participate in sports and they happen to be trans, you can talk openly with them about that. Do more listening than speaking always in those conversations, and listen with the intent to understand. It's also incredibly important to educate ourselves before we move into those conversations. Don't allow the students, don't force the students to educate you. I always say Professor Google, she's very accommodating and she's open 24/7. So, consult Professor Google, especially Professor Google Scholar, which is, already vetted for you. But do that education, find out what's happening in legislature, and talk candidly with students about issues that are facing them outside of academia, because those issues will affect their academics. So those are my smallest tips. So make sure that you're putting things in your cubicle that are openly showing your support for those types of things, and then having those conversations and educating yourself as well. And then also social media is really important. When I think about my students are always looking at, well, did our college tweet about this thing? Did they have a statement after Black Lives Matter? Did they put a statement out? When I think about what's happening currently with our Asian Pacific Islander students, was there a statement made about stopping AAP I hate? Have they used the hashtag? These are all little clues that people look for about, is the college aware and do they care about these things? And are they openly, again, like I said, intentionally including? If you don't intentionally include, you unintentionally exclude. Yeah, so that's my advice with LGBTQ students. And also, of course, be inclusive in your language. Sorry, that's one thing I just remembered again. Be inclusive in your language. Don't assume heteronormativity. Like, don't assume that your student's straight and say, oh, do you have a boyfriend, or, are you married? Things like that. Don't make those assumptions. Don't assume somebody's gender. Always don't assume somebody's gender, and that's again why I introduce myself with my pronouns, so that if they do have pronouns that aren't what society would expect, then they have that open door, right? It opens the door for them to share their pronouns with me as well, and to know that I'm somebody who understands how much that means. It is really, really damaging to misgender a student or to call them by their dead name. So make sure that you always ask, what name would you like to be called? And what are your pronouns, so that you don't damage them in that way.
I think there's a lot that we can unpack, and definitely these are very contentious times, and we really appreciate your input here and your experience, and giving us some of these points. And we are almost at the top of our hour. We have about 10 minutes. So if anyone has questions, please drop them in the chat. But Echo Hawk, I wanted to just come back and, when we're talking about this framework for coming back to campus and creating visibility, my question is, our biggest hit in enrollment were students of color and students from low income backgrounds. What do you think that we need to keep in mind to have a pipeline of students coming into college to make them feel that they are college worthy, they have assets to share with the world? And how can we create that pipeline, which includes promoting college for Native American Indians as well?
I think the first step is to understand the traumas of different underrepresented minorities. In the Native American community, we have something called the historical trauma. But really, all underrepresented minority communities have some sort of trauma that kind of shaped and mold the communities that they are today. So you look at some of and that also includes all of the systemic policies, that we kind of started off talking about, like our reservation systems, and you're looking at, the different resources that are available in our different nations. And so people left, our different reservations coming to the urban areas, for employment and for better futures for children. But when they left the reservations, they also left some of the healthcare things that they had there, the supports and resources. And so really they kind of ventured. It's very similar to someone from, in the early immigration of people coming to the US, coming here not knowing what to expect. But in some instances, the US policies was, I'll give you a one-way bus ticket and we'll give you this, that, and the other. And when they came to the cities, it wasn't the case. They were kind of left to fend on their own. And so really, I guess the first step is to understand, the different traumas that all of these different communities are from, and our African-American relatives, our Hispanic relatives, our Native American relatives, and seeing how that formalized their ways of being. And then also, to extend, I guess, if you're trying to create pathway programs, extend programs and services all the way into not only the high school, middle school, but also into the elementary. Because of some of these historical traumas, a lot of our young people, by the time they get to middle school, they already have, an idea that education is something that's not important, that because of these cycles of poverty, that getting a job and trying to work at Burger King or, just somewhere, some type of employment to get income is something that they need to do. Not really realizing that education is really a tool for them to use to better themselves and then uplift their communities and things of that nature. So starting there, I think the STEM fields is something that's really, we have a lot of support with the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. Leadership development, especially, I think those types of resilience building, types of programs and services are really beneficial, for all groups, because that's something that we don't talk about in our schools. We're so focused on academia that we leave emotional developments out of it. And then just because of historical trauma, our parenting and our, the ways that our families are set up, they're not the way that they once were, I guess you could say. And so helping our young people to understand how to manage their emotions, their thoughts, their feelings, I think that's something that's very important, especially with mental health, coming out of COVID, that's something we haven't talked about yet, but there's a lot of people who are in grief and in certain types of turmoil and despair because, there was a lot of death that happened in COVID. I think everybody's kind of been impacted in some way. And so being able to have mental health services available, being able to talk openly about certain things. I think a lot of times these historical traumas, they help us to, or they've inhibited us to keep secrets, don't talk about this, don't talk about that. But really, we should be able to talk about everything open and freely. And then being able to manage these conversations, how complex and intricate and even how painful that they might be. Sometimes it's something that we all need to kind of do to persevere and to become stronger and better. And then it helps, us to focus, on the future of how education, how to do better for ourselves and things of that nature. And so, those are some things that I think that we need to understand from all communities, is how, what was their path of, to getting to where they are today, not just within their lifetime, but within also their parents and grandparents and different generations.
Right. And, that's quite, that trauma. And I think we have a session on trauma as well later on. But we have 5 minutes left. And Sandra, I'd like you to just kind of talk a little bit about, some of the things that EchoHawk has mentioned about coming back with all of these traumas that we've experienced. But we also must not forget that we experienced a COVID too, right? We've experienced a whole upheaval of our lives as well. And some of us lost dear ones too. And what kind of recommendation do you have for advisors and staff that are on here? How can we preserve our own well-being while being a resource to students who may even need us 10 times more? I think in our last session, Dr. Quinton said, advisors are superheroes. They don a cape and they come to work every day to help someone else, while inside they may be struggling. So Sandra, can you talk a little bit to this?
Look for your own support systems too. It could be people, it could be family, and some people, like I am in Omaha without family, but Dr. Pearson here is my sister. So looking for that, and she delivered bread to me, and she did some goody stuff for me. She always check. Is those check-ins? Have somebody to check in to. Be okay also with, I discovered that I have to be myself with the students too. Having this other persona to put in, like I'm a happy face all the time. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I struggle. And it is okay to be human and tell our students, I'm struggling today. I'm struggling today. So, because you may have had a death in your family. My mom was diagnosed with cancer in the middle of COVID. So it's those type of things that I told my students, right now I need to deal with my family and it's okay, but I will be ready for you. But I also need to be honest with myself, with my students. Don't try to put a persona that you're not. Accept when it's a bad day. Reach out. Don't, reach out. Have your own support systems. They always say self-care, and I will say self-care your way, because I'm not a person that goes into a spa, but I needed to go to the chiropractor because my back was a mess. So I did the chiropractor religiously. Be Schedule that on your schedule, the same way that you schedule other things. What it is important for you, and have fun with what makes you have fun. Because people will have you, like, will do other suggestions for you. What it is that you have fun with. I'm not going to do belly dancing when I hate belly dancing, because I don't have any steps, but I like doing Zumba. So I'm gonna do Zumba. So, and those type of things, what it is that makes you do it.
Mm-hmm. And Farrell, we're gonna end with this last one. I know you do a lot of advocacy and you take a lot of heat for it as well. So, and I know in our campus, we have very, very dedicated and very passionate staff members who sometimes would like to advocate, would like to take matters higher up, but the organizational structures may not hear their voices. What advice can you give to them? Like, how can organizational leadership of an institution support the work we do on the front lines to be able to then empower our students to rise?
So a couple of things. Find allies in leadership. So find people who are truly understanding of real issues and aren't afraid to shy away from them, and seek advice from them as well. And then also bring those stories to them. Like I said before, there's that power of story. So bring those stories to people who have the power, so that they truly understand what's happening as well. You also have to protect yourself by knowing your rights. That's something I learned a long time ago when I was advocating back in high school and lawyers were called on me and all of this kind of stuff. It's really important to know what your rights are so that people can't take advantage of you. I wish I could say that, oh, all leadership has the best of intentions. They don't. Like, I just have to be honest about that. There are people who care more about funders and donors than they do about the well-being of students and the well-being of their employees. I just have to say that from personal experience. And so you have to understand what your rights are, and you have to be a little bit cynical about what's going to happen so that you can protect yourself when you are doing that advocacy. A lot of times people will, my life has been threatened. We've had to move because of my advocacy and all of that kind of stuff. And people are like, well, why do you still do it? You should protect yourself and your kids. But the thing is that I have more power and more privilege than my students do, and that young people do, really young people. And so I can't sleep at night knowing that, I can leave, I can move my house and be safer, but they have to keep going back into that situation every day. And so for me, it's about thinking about my students, thinking about the people I serve as a part of my family. And I can't sleep if somebody in my family is hungry, somebody in my family is in danger, somebody is not okay. But we do have to protect ourselves by finding out who are my allies, what are my rights, what can I get away with, and finding kind of those loopholes to go through, and those kind of policies that you can bend a little bit. I had ACLU Nebraska on my speed dial for a long time. That might have to be you, but definitely look at those handbooks, look at those policies, and understand truly what you are entitled to, what your rights are. Look at Academic Freedom Coalition of Nebraska. They're really helpful as well. So yeah, that's kind of my scary advice.
Thanks, Ferial. We're going to start a revolution, right? No, guys, we're not starting a revolution. So, but we are going to advocate in the best way possible for our students. So thank you very much for all you do. Thank you, Echo Hawk Left Hand. Thank you, Sandra Rodriguez. It was a really interesting and, a discussion I think we need to continuously have, that we can take and back to our institutions and at least begin the discussion to say, who's being left out, how can we make them more visible? Thank you so much, and have a nice afternoon, and we will resume after lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.